Welcome to the Fellowship Podcast, a place where we have gospel conversations about loving God and transforming lives by following Jesus through life-on-life relationships. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Fellowship Podcast. I'm excited to be here with Rod Limely, founding member of Fellowship Church, one of our first elders that we've had there, and generally one of the nicest, most helpful guys that I know. Also, many people don't know this, he is the light maestro for Night in Bethlehem. All 14,000 lights. If Rod never didn't do the lights, we would have no idea what happened. We would have to do our best. But Rod, thanks for coming to the podcast.
Yeah.
So tell us about Rod Limely. Tell us your story. I know you have an incredible story, how God has just been so faithful. So tell us about Rod Limely.
Well, I think for me, especially because of how I got here and how I was born, I have to go all the way back to the very beginning, even before I was born. My mother was very young, had my brother. I have an older brother who's 53. She was 18 years old when he was born. And you got to know my mother's background is that she comes from a family of 11 children, very large Catholic family from the central part of Louisiana around Baton Rouge. And so, of course, my brother was born out of wedlock. And so, and he was also born kind of handicapped. He was born with a condition where he had only part fingers and toes. And so, although he's never let that candy, he's never been said he was born that way. And so evidently my mother was very much in love with a graduate student from LSU. And she was working as a waitress. And 3 years later, she gets pregnant with me. Funny thing is that my brother and I both are true brothers. We're not half brothers because she got pregnant with both of us from the same guy. She was very much in love with him. I guess she assumed that they were going to get married someday. Well, when he found out she was pregnant with me, he just took off. Never saw him again. Really don't know much about him. All we know about his name was Thomas, and that's all I know. Mom doesn't really talk about him, and so we don't push the subject. So we do know that, from talking to some other family members, that he was the love of her life then. And so, but it's a typical story, it happens. And so, but my mother kept my brother and raised him. And of course, 21 years old, young, not married, large Catholic family. She never told anybody that she was pregnant with me. Only person she ever told was her mother, which I never got to meet. She died a year before I met my biological family. And so nobody ever knew I existed other than her and my grandmother. And so she had made an arrangement. She was living in New Orleans with a couple, Paul and their names were Paul and Lois. And they were having trouble having children. And so she had made an arrangement that when I was born, they were going to take me and adopt me. And so that went pretty well as planned, except for they never adopted me. Few years later, Lois got pregnant and had a little boy named Timmy. I always knew him as my cousin. Really wasn't my cousin. Yeah, that's what I always called him. It was my brother when I was with her, but I guess he was my cousin later on. And I'll explain how all that.
Yeah.
So, few years, I guess when I was, earliest memory I ever had was standing up in a baby pen. We lived above the movie theater in Picayune, Mississippi. And he was in the baby pen across from me. And I probably was 3, 4, as far as I can remember. And Paul and her had split up. And so she couldn't take care of all of us. So she wound up passing me on to her parents, which is who I'll refer to as grandma. Very sweet people, very nice, very kind, but probably the best years of my childhood was spent, a couple of years I spent with them as a child. They lived on a little farm out in the middle of nowhere, got to run wild like a wildcat, and swim in the pond and milk cows and all kinds of crazy stuff, burn the chicken house down when I was, me and Timmy both got beat profusely for that one. But anyway, we told her that a cigarette butt was flipped out and it caught the barn on fire. The road was like 200 yards away. So
big flick out there.
Yeah, needless to say, we got to switch for that one. But anyway, so but when I was about 6 years old, Grandpa Earhart had a stroke and was paralyzed and eventually died. And so, of course, Grandma Earhart by then she had already had 3 heart attacks and had throat cancer and had a hole in her throat, and and so anyway, so she wound up couldn't take care of me. I was a very rambunctious, hyper. You know how energetic I am now. You can imagine what I was
I
like
can
at 6
imagine.
years old. She wound up passing me on to her oldest son, Bruce. Things kind of go off tracks with Bruce. They had 5 children of their own. Bruce was a long haul trucker and alcoholic. Um, Evelyn, Bruce's wife, never liked me. She always thought I was just an additional burden to the family. And so when Bruce was sober, he was a pretty decent guy. He was a hard worker, taught us a lot. I learned a lot from him growing up, worked and learned how to work hard, learned how to do many, many different things. As you know, I can do just about anything. But when he was drunk, he was a violent person. And so over the course of the years, you know, um, been backhanded across the room, been kicked, been whipped with a bullwhip, been whipped with a extension cord, a rope, a water hose. You name it, we got beat with it. If it was close enough to be swung, we got hit with it. When I was about 8 years old, he lined us all up against the wall one day in his bedroom with a shotgun and threatened to kill us all because we were all worthless. He was very abusive to Evelyn. Evelyn antagonized him. It's just one.
Yeah, toxic.
Like everybody, when he was home and
Yeah.
home for many years. I tell everybody that it took me till I was an adult to realize how bad the verbal abuse was. The physical abuse was, it was never sexual, but it was physical. But the verbal abuse, when I went back home after 15 years of being away and being around him, I was like, oh my God, no wonder it was just crazy because we were worthless and, never heard me. As far as my Evelyn went, I never remember a kind word from her.
Yeah.
Never remembered, don't remember anything, a hug, love you. We never had birthday parties. We very seldom did Christmas. We very seldom did Easter, any holiday. It was just a lot. It was just, you went to school, you came home, you did your chores. We were very poor. We always lived in some raggedy old house, never had money. We didn't even have TV till I was 12. I tell everybody I pretty much had the encyclopedias memorized because that's what I'd read at night, and
It's
so
kind of crazy how in all these scenarios so far that word invisible just keeps kind of coming up, right?
Yeah.
I can't believe you went through all that.
Yeah, it was difficult. But as a kid, you adapt. One thing it did, and of course you'll if you know me, survival instinct.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I had to go through a lot of counseling for me to get a grip on survival instinct.
Yeah.
Because I'm the type of person, hey, if you don't want to help, it's fine. I'll get it done myself. Don't need you. Well, that affects your marriage. And in your marriage, if you don't need your spouse or they don't feel needed, it's a problem.
Yeah.
And so for many years, we've been married 37 years. And it's been very difficult. But early on, Sherry at times felt like I didn't need her because I just go to my survival instinct. Okay, well, fine, I'll just do it myself.
Right. Because you've been taught that you didn't need anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't rely on anybody because if they don't want you right now, they'll pass you to this person.
That's
if
right.
they don't want you, here, this person, you take them. You don't want them, but here, you take them. And,
it was, so you learn, you pick that up. And of course, anybody who's been through abuse in long term, most people I've talked to over the years as a Christian and men who've gone through that kind of stuff, they either shut completely down or they just learn a survival instinct. Yeah. And so, very hard to shake that. Yeah. And I still have a lot of it. It's still there.
It still rears up, right? Like a lot of times when we are backed into a corner, the things that we've been taught, kind of the lies we believe about ourselves, they'll rear their ugly head. And, thank goodness we have Jesus to help us show that grace. And our wives that love Jesus give us a lot of grace when those things come out, And
of course, it affects your walk with Jesus because, we're to depend on God for where our strength comes from. But when you've been relying on your own strength all these years, it's kind of like, sometimes when things go bad, and God has put us, and I'm going to talk about it, God has put us in situations where I've had to go, okay, God.
Yeah.
How to use that, it's a very good thing to have, but it's all.
Yeah.
It's how you deal with it and you handle it.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do it biblically or if you're going to do it in your own power. And so, I'll be honest with you, with some of the losses I've seen over the years of people and families and young people and all that kind of stuff, it's like, how do you handle that without God?
Right. I don't know.
I don't know how you do it.
Mm-mm.
Where's your hope come from?
Well, and a lot of
Yeah.
people don't handle it well.
Mm.
You know, even if it on the outside they look fine, they've shut it down on the
Yeah.
inside. So
Yeah. And so basically, I was the only one out of said there were 6 kids of us. There was Bruce, who was 11 years older than me. Bruce was very angry and violent. Little Bruce, he was 6 months older than me. Both of them were over 6 foot tall. Little Bruce was 6'6". When he was in 9th grade, he weighed 200 something pounds. He was a big old boy. But we were raised to be
the baddest.
Yeah. You just, you
Scariest,
don't take lip
toughest.
from nobody. You fight at the drop of a hat. You're a man. You don't, sexually, hey, look, if you can get a girl, you did it.
Yeah.
Dad didn't care. He taught us that.
That's the
Yeah. I
nature.
was just,
The world.
that's what a man was.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then there were 3 girls. There was Linda, Barbara, and Pee Wee, or Margie. We called her Pee Wee, because little bitty skinny thing. But she would fight you at the drop of a hat. So would Linda. They could whoop most guys. Sad thing was all 3 of the girls were married and pregnant by the time we were 15 years old. And Bruce and Ronald both were kicked out of high school for fighting with the principal. I mean, not talking about arguing, we're talking about fist fight. And so nobody made it past the 9th grade but me. I was the only one to graduate high school. I just set my mind on it. One thing that I realized when I was about 12 years old, that something ain't right here. Something just ain't right, because I had friends outside of high school. And even though I didn't spend a lot of time around it was obvious that their family life was different than mine. And so there were opportunities to go to church growing up. We go to vacation Bible schools sometimes when we were kids. And, it was mainly for the games and the food.
Yeah.
Because half the time we ate 1 meal a day, if we got that, And so, being as poor as we were, we basically, since I could remember, always heated our homes with wood in the winter, never had air conditioning. It was always, like I said, we always lived in some podunk house about to fall down. Never had a new car, and especially never had a car with air conditioning in it.
Yeah.
So, but every half our summer was spent gathering firewood for the winter. Even though we lived in South Mississippi, it still got cold, know, and so, hunt, fish, and my dad always grew a big garden. So we always gardened and and be honest with you, one thing that I'll still love to do from that was I still love to grow a big garden, and I've got one. And so, a lot of good things come from it, a lot of good hard work. You never, if something broke, you fixed it. Wasn't no paying somebody to do it. You just figured out a way to fix it. So my adaptability comes from that. So there's a lot of good things that can come from that. I always, me, I try to always be positive about most things. And so,
but there are scars.
Oh yeah, they're
thing.
Deep scars, a lot of baggage. One thing I didn't get to talk to with the young adults was the baggage you bring into your walk, because that baggage is with you, and it's hard to get rid of.
Yeah,
biggest baggage thing I have is pride. Out of there, I got through high school, did this, I did that, then I realized when I got saved that, I didn't do anything.
Yeah,
I just, God was always there. I just didn't know it, and so. I think that's where God kind of, my first thought about where God kind of directed me was when I was 12, but I decided I'm graduating high school and I'm getting out of here. It's my way out. Plus I love school. School was my escape from the craziness.
Yeah.
It was normal.
One stable thing really in your life.
And then I got to play sports, which I was really good at. I was really good. I was really fast in high school, really aggressive, as you can imagine.
Yeah. And it's a positive outlet for your aggression.
Yeah, and so I got to hit people without getting in trouble. So I was an outside linebacker in football, and I played every down. I played on every team, punt team, kick team, kickoff team, you name it. I played on it. So really loved doing it. Though it was fun. But started my first job when I was 11 years old. I've had a job ever since I was 11.
Wow. What was your first job?
Bagged ice for the Handy Ice Company.
Okay.
I'd ride my bicycle down to the Handy Ice Company, which is about 10 miles away from the house, and sit there at the machine and hand bag ice and load it on the truck. And once I got my license, I started driving the truck and delivering ice. And so, but in between that, like in the wintertime, I would haul firewood. I would, I've done a little bit of everything, put roofs on houses, do pulpwood. A lot of people don't know what pulpwood is, but it's a wood they use to make paper.
Okay.
And you cut it and you hand load it on a truck. And so I did that. I've done, golly, you name it, carpentry work. I've pushed wheelbarrows of mortar for bricklayers. I've just, anything to make a buck.
Yeah.
Basically, because back, you didn't get money from your parents. You had to make money if you wanted it. And so just worked my tail off, and I learned, I think one of the reasons why I always worked hard was that that was the only place I ever got praise.
Yeah. People
would talk about, man, you're a hard worker. You're so good at what, you're always wanting to do the right thing. You're always wanting to work hard. You're always willing to do whatever I tell you to do. You don't complain. You don't. And so I think that one of the reasons why I like working so much wasn't just the money part of it. It was that it was where people would praise me for something that I never got before. And so, and unfortunately for me, really had no mentors growing up. It was just never anybody, no adult who ever tried to mentor me or help me. And so, so it was kind of to me, that was a positive thing. Like school, I was really good in school. Of course, I went to school in South Mississippi. Ain't saying much, but but anyway, not for a knock on the school. But I had teachers who cared.
Yeah.
Mrs. Watson, who was my English teacher for like 3 years of my high school, she would always choose me for student teacher, and I couldn't spell worth a flip.
Yeah.
But she liked me, and I worked hard. And she would every year she'd say, "Rod, you're going to be student teacher," which I hated because I really did not become an extroverted person until I was 17, 18 years old. I was pretty quiet, much like my son Matthew, who's very quiet and reserved. I was the same way. Now you start talking to Matthew now, he'll talk your ear off.
Yeah.
But
once you get him talking, they will.
Yeah. And he's very interesting to talk to. But so childhood was just survival, trying to stay out of the way, work as hard as I could. But just to go back a little bit, Dad was very abusive to Mom, or to Evelyn. Bruce was very abusive to Evelyn. He'd hit her. I always tell the story. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's not. One night we were all in the kitchen. This was when we lived down in Kill, Mississippi. I was probably 9, 10 years old. Him and her got into a big argument and fight. And he literally threw a potato at her. She was cooking dinner. He grabbed a potato and threw it at her, hit her so hard, knocked her out.
Oh.
And, of course, you got to realize Bruce was 6'4" and about 250 pounds. He's a man, big man. And so he was very intimidating. Even my wife, when she first saw him, she only saw him in a picture of, when he died. And she said, man, he looked mean.
Yeah.
I was like, well, he was.
Yeah.
But the other thing I realized as an adult is I got to go back and look at how he was raised. I'm not saying making excuses.
Right.
But we need to go back and sometimes put ourselves in their position and understand that his father was a raging alcoholic. Matter of fact, got killed on Bourbon Street, run over by a car drunk. How he died. And he was very violent and very mean. And so he just did what he saw his dad do.
And that's the thing, is somebody's got to make, you made a choice.
Yeah.
Right? At 12 years old, that I'm not going to continue this crazy cycle that I'm in. I'm going to get out of this cycle. I'm going to work hard at school, at a job. I'm going to make it through all of this. And if you don't make that conscious choice, you're going to end up, a lot of the things being that generational sin just gets passed down.
Yeah. Generational sin is a very real thing. I mean, I've had to break the chain, and unfortunately, none of us other kids ever did.
Yeah.
I mean, just to give you an example, all of them, there's only one still alive out of 5 of them.
Wow.
The 5 biological kids. Little Bruce, who's my age, would have been my age, died 3 years ago, got run over by a train strung out on crack. I mean, he was run over walking down the tracks. They found parts of him for miles. Pee-wee died of brain cancer. Barbara, who I think is still alive, I think she's still alive. She's on oxygen but still smokes. I mean, she's probably, I want to say Barbara's probably close to 70 now. She's been by far the oldest one. Yeah. All the others died in their 60s.
Yeah.
And all of them had smoked. I mean, my house looked like a bar on Friday night. I mean, it was just a layer of smoke. And funny thing is, I never smoked. Never had the desire to smoke. Now, I chewed tobacco when I was younger, but I quit that when I was a young adult. But I think, of course, I'll get to this too about your genes and how you made, because it's really funny. But of course, I got through high school. somehow, some way. But just to give people an idea of the conditions we grew up in, um, we lived in a mobile home, single wide mobile home with 5 kids. And we had a hole in our kitchen floor. Matter of fact, it was hilarious because I can't remember who I was talking to. It was somebody who had knew me. I went back home after 12 years. And of course, I'll get to that story and what happened then. But someone reminded me, remember that old mobile home y'all lived in? It had the big hole in the kitchen floor. We used to go. But we would literally, the roaches were so bad in our home that we would literally in the wintertime leave the house when it got really, really, really cold, we would leave the house for the heat and so that the roaches would freeze to death so we could get rid of them. It was that bad sometimes. I mean, when you turn on the light, it's a mad scramble.
Yeah.
And so, but it was normal. We just grew up in it. So we never thought anything of it. We farmed, we grew a big old garden, probably 2 or 3 acres every year. We plowed it with a horse. Believe it or not, I'm 60 years old. I've plowed behind a horse for many summers as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I'm talking about, I grew up like baby boomer.
Yeah.
Even though I'm right on the end of the baby boomers, I was born in 65. I grew up more like my dad and his granddad than I did in my generation because that's how what we did,
Yeah, because you're far behind. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, and so we had chickens. I'll be honest with you, as a young teenager growing up, there were days where if we didn't have chickens, we wouldn't eat.
Yeah. And
that's because we had eggs. I mean, I can remember 2 or 3 times a week. I basically ate, you could buy a 10-pack bag of potatoes for $1.50. And I would make my own French fries, and we raised our own hogs. And so a lot of times whenever we would butcher the hog, we would cook down and make our own lard. And so I would fry potatoes in that lard and then take a couple eggs and crack it a potato. That's what supper.
That's it.
It's what you ate, if you want to eat. And once I started working and doing something, then I would eat out a little more. But, I don't ever remember eating at a restaurant till I was 11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
I never, that includes McDonald's, of course, we didn't get McDonald's till I was making 15 years old in my town. Yeah. So we had a Dairy Queen. We had a store called Frost Top, which is the greatest place in the world, but, I remember my mom usually Evelyn was a waitress most of the time, and she would come home and give us a quarter. And so when we lived in Kill, Mississippi, we lived next to an old country store, the old country stores. And we go in there with a quarter and buy a Snickers bar, a Coke, and a bag of peanuts for a quarter. Yeah. And so, but that's when she would give it to us, So there were good things growing up. We loved to camp. We do a lot of camping and go swimming in the creeks and the rivers and fish and a lot of outdoor stuff that was a lot of fun. And you learn we'd go crawfish in the spring and catch our own crawfish. And, I tell people that, we'd wade out in the swamp with alligators and, just the way we grew up. I mean, it was just the way, we rabbit hunted. My dad, Bruce, loved to rabbit hunt and had rabbit dogs, and we go out rabbit hunting with dogs. And so there was a lot of things we learned that were good. Mm-hmm. It was just the abusive part that was hard. And I
think that's true of a lot of our lives that, when you walk through, I think about the things that happened to me in my life, and it made me achieve. I felt like I was only loved if I achieved.
Yeah.
And so it made me really successful.
Yeah.
Still, at the end of the day, I felt really empty inside,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So the same thing, like God gave you all these incredible skills through the hardest and the craziest of times, but then God's really let you discover some of your story to be able to really look back on it and deal with it. Because I can't imagine how hard it would have been in the moment to deal with all those things. You had to have that internal willpower, like you said, the survival instinct that pushes you through to keep taking that next step.
And it's amazing how that kicks in. I mean, it's just, even as a young child, that kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
Just like hiding, becoming a ghost. Those are things that you just instinctively, happens to you. Doing what you got to do. I mean, to survive. And I mean, we're built that way. God built us that way.
Yeah.
But He built us that way in order to rely on Him. But the problem is that when you distort that, it can become a huge issue. And Lord knows I've done enough counseling.
But I think that's something not to, people don't. I think a lot of people used to think counseling was like just for the weak or whatever. But that's the only way to get the baggage taken care of is to have someone, looking at your life and helping you walk through that baggage. So what happened next in your story?
Basically, once I got to high school, graduated high school, I joined the Army. Was in the military for 4 years.
Thank you for serving.
Loved the military, appreciate it. Loved the Army. Like Sherry said, we served during a good time when Reagan was president. So, really saw no combat, even though I did serve in a combat area back when Nicaragua and El Salvador were going at it. I was in an engineer battalion. I was a machinist and welder in the Army, and kind of picked up machine shop when I was a teenager in high school. Started taking machine shop when I was a sophomore in high school, and sort of learned that trade. And shop teacher always said I had a natural knack for it, and I did.
Good.
I was very mechanically inclined. And so that was my first profession for the first 15 years of my working life, was a machinist. And so did that in the Army, got to travel a lot in the Army, wasted a lot of money and time in the Army, chasing women and drinking beer. I mean, that was my goal. I mean, I didn't really think anything of it. I'd left all that other stuff behind. Never went back home when I went into the military. Never went back out. Never went back for 15 years. Just left it behind me, didn't want nothing to do with them, didn't care, just did not want to go back to that. Even when I met Sherry, I completely lied to her about what happened to my family. I told her they were all killed in a car wreck because I just didn't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so, but the military was good for me. It's good for me in those young years, gave me some discipline, allowed me to, most people don't know the Army is like a job for the most part, other than playing war. It's a job. There's the monotony of it every day, going to work every day. Of course I did because I went to a motor pool and got to work in a trade every day and do all that, but really enjoyed the military. Nothing dramatic happened during that time other than I met Sherry right at the last end of it. But before I met her, I was planning on re-enlisting. I was going to go Special Forces. I was assigned to a Special Forces unit in Hawaii when I was stationed in Hawaii. I didn't have a job. They sent me to Hawaii and didn't have a job for me because they had converted to a light infantry unit, so they didn't have support. So I spent a year in Hawaii, just basically got to go to Australia, got to go to Thailand, got to go to Japan, got to do a bunch of different things, go to a bunch of different places, do a bunch of different things. And so, got assigned to what they called an infiltration unit. And so basically you came in helicopters, rappelled out of a helicopter into people's battle zones, and you tried to infiltrate their perimeters. And so we got to do that, and it was fun as heck.
Yeah,
loved every minute of it. Yeah, and I was a 60 gunner, so I'm coming out of the helicopter, just going crazy, And so, but really loved it. And of course, the commander there said you would make a really good ranger. You ought to go ranger. Yeah. And I told him, well, heck, if I'm going to go ranger, I'm going Green Beret, And so I was gung ho, ready to do it. And then I met Sherry and fell in love. And she decided, and Sherry was also in the Army. So we both served in the military. We both met in Colorado Springs. But she did not want to go back to the military. And so asked her to marry me, I think in January or February of 87. And we got married in August of 87. But before we could get out of the military, her dad passed away in that April. And so I drove her home and met her family, and never forget her oldest sister, Vonette and Dole. Dole and Vonette both had been in jail for dealing drugs. They were going to go to prison. And by the grace of God, they got out through a pastor named Brother Bob Hannigan. Incredible man of God. Met him, got him saved, got him out, and Dole wound up becoming a pastor.
Wow.
And started his own church and pastored his own church for like 30 years. Right now Vonette's fighting for her life, but just an incredible person. And so, but anyway, I never forget sitting in the living room. Of course, you got to realize I'm 22 years old, cocky, full of myself and pride. And she just looks at me. She goes, "Are you saved? Do you think you're going to marry my sister and not be saved? You're out of your mind." And I'm just saying, of course, you got to realize Vonette's a 5'9" fiery redhead, right? So I'm sitting here going, "Who's this woman talking to me like that? I'm fit to come out of this seat and smack her," And so, really began me thinking. And then Sherry got out of Army early on a hardship discharge to help her mom after her dad passed away. And then I got out in July, and then we got married August 1st. Well, in between July and August 1st, I was living with Vonette and Dole in Dallas looking for a job. And it was the one time in my life I didn't have a job for a short period of time. And it was really frustrating for me because I was, it's the mid 80s. It's kind of when the bust was going on. I couldn't find a job. I was frustrated. I was drinking every day. Nobody knew it, but, I was drinking a lot. Really got down on myself, kind of got depressed. God kind of got me in a hole. And then we were going to Dow Rock Baptist Church. It's where Dole was teaching the young adults, which is now Lake Point Baptist Church, by the way. Yeah, Brother Steve Stroop was the pastor back when he was a young man.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were going to his church, and I wound up getting saved in the church when I was just before we got married. And wasn't shortly after that I had confessed that my family wasn't dead. So, because Sherry's mom's looking at me like, that's just that story's just hard to believe, right? So I wound up confessing that I lied, and but I told them reason why, and they understood. And Sherry's mother became my mother. I mean, her mother was so dear to me, and so she became my mother. And but to be honest with you, I've never really had a good father figure in my life ever. But I've always had older men friends who were close friends. But my Sunday school teacher's name was Nick Woodall. Nick was an attorney. And Nick invited me. He says, "Hey, every Tuesday morning we're going to meet at my office at 6:00 in the morning, and we're going to learn the Bible." And so he did that with me for about 2 years, and challenged me to memorize scripture, sit down with me. And to be honest with you, Dick passed away a while back, and I never got a chance to thank him. But Nick was an incredible man. But Vonnet and Dole was always very, very big influences on us. Loved them, but got saved and immediately jumped into church, and just engulfed myself in the Bible, every morning. Just it changed my life. Quit drinking immediately. Like I told you earlier, I hadn't had a drink between 22 and probably, in my early 40s for many years. And so, but God just really worked on me, really huge growth, huge blessings. I quit chewing tobacco, just cold turkey, just after years of doing it, and it's hard to do. Of course, it was mean as a rattlesnake for about 2 weeks, but Sherry could attest to that. But Sherry and I just kind of cruised along. We didn't have children for 10 years. It was just her and I. 3 or 4 years in, we started having a lot of problems, a lot of arguing and fighting. Sherry and I both, Sherry likes to say we're both shouters and not powders. And so we would get in some pretty heated arguments. She's had me mad enough to want to hit her, but I never have. There have been times when I've grabbed her and, but I never hit her. Just because I just never want to be like my dad, like Bruce. Which plus it's just not the right thing to do.
Right.
But we did counseling over the years, several times over the years. Matter of fact, Nick, I never forget, they knew we were struggling. Him and his wife paid for us to go to a marriage conference, and we went to a couple of different marriage conferences, which really helped us learn some communication skills. Because as you can imagine, Sherry and I come from totally different backgrounds. Sherry's family was pretty much stable. Now, Sherry knows that her dad was an alcoholic too, but he was a very quiet and docile alcoholic, never abusive, just never was there for him a lot of times. He would be, he was there, but he wasn't. He turned into kind of a ghost. But he was very much involved in their lives, through their lives. So not like he was a disappearing dad, but just, he was never that like me, I'm going to be at every kid's event.
You were the disappearing one in your household.
Right. Yeah. So, but through that, Sherry had separating anxiety. We did not spend a night apart for the first 10 years we were married.
Wow.
And so, and come to find out, one of the reasons why we did was because Sherry, because of that reason, and we learned that through counseling, that she just, now she's like, get out of the house, leave, go. But so I think one lesson for many young couples, don't be afraid to get counseling, because sometimes it just takes a different perspective or a different ear to help you get through stuff. It's not about pride. It's not about who's wrong or right. It's just about the right way to deal with it, especially Christian counseling, because they give you a biblical answer. But there were many scriptures that Nick and I memorized over the years. I remember one of the first scriptures that I learned that I really stood on for a long time was, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so I had leaned on that scripture a lot. And then the whole chapter of Romans 8, to me is just one of the most encouraging and most powerful chapters in the whole Bible. Um, and so, but learned early on my gifting, which has helped.
Yep. I was saying.
And so, and then learned early on that if you won't join your Christian walk, use your gift.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yep.
you just hold it to yourself, you're kind of defeating the purpose of having a gift.
Yeah.
And so, and really very much love helping people. Very much, Lord knows I've moved enough people over the
Yes.
years.
We have moved enough that we have a list of
Yeah.
the worst moves.
But, Sherry and I, we grew together in Christ. Even though Sherry was saved when she was a teenager and went to church a lot and grew up in a very good home, very Christian home. She, when she joined the military, like everybody, a lot of people join the military, they just kind of go their own way, party and do their own thing, almost like going to college. But we, fortunately for us, we got married young, we got saved young, and we've pretty much walked with God the whole since we've been saved. But we'll get to so in my late 20s, I became a very angry and very bitter person, and couldn't figure out why. Didn't understand it. Just there was it was like a marked change in me.
And nothing happened. It was
Nothing
just like,
happened.
okay.
Nothing happened. No, we were living in East Texas, had a good job, nice little home, great friends, good Sunday school, good church. Everything was fine, but just something was off. I had no peace. I was very angry, not necessarily angry at Sherry, but just angry, very bitter, and couldn't figure out what was going on. And one night I'm sitting watching TV, and I don't know if people remember this commercial, but they used to have this commercial where dad's teaching the little boy how to dip his Oreo in the milk and open it up and eat the Oreo. I'm bawling like a baby. I'm sitting here looking at this, and Sherry's just looking at me like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "I don't know." And so I can't remember. I don't remember if we went and visited Vonette and Dole for one of the holidays. Usually we did, and back in Dallas. But we were at their house, and Vonette had just gone through some of this, and she said, "Rod, I know exactly what's wrong with you." And I went, "What?" She says, "You need to forgive." I went, "What are you talking about?" She says, "You need to forgive your family. You need to forgive the people who raised you." And I'm like, "I don't think so, homeboy." I was like, that's hard.
Yeah.
And so she says, "You need to read Leviticus." I think that's where it talks about breaking the chains of intergenerational sins.
Yep.
Matter of fact, what's funny is I've been listening to a podcast on Right Now Media, the Book of Philemon, which is a book on what? Reconciliation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought that was funny that I'm doing this week, and I just started listening to that in the last couple of days, and so I was like, "Wow, that's interesting." But so I said, "Okay, I'll," and I don't know. The Gaithers had a book out about breaking the chains of family chains of sin or sin, and so I read through the book a little bit, and then I began to pray about it, and I fasted a couple of days over it. God impressed on me, says, "She's absolutely right. I want you to forgive them." And I'm just like, "Lord." And so kind of had a little way you did it. You sit down and you write down all the transgressions that you can remember.
Yeah.
And then pray over them and then give those to God and then go to that person and ask, tell them you forgive them. And so I'm like, okay, but I'd been gone for 15 years. I had no desire to go back. And so I sit down there. I had 5 legal pages full of stuff.
Wow.
And that's what I could remember. I mean, it just flowed out of me. I mean, it was just like, it just came back so vividly. I could remember every incident. I could remember Dad beating Linda with a stick that big, just because she skipped school. And now, don't get it wrong, I wasn't the only one abused.
Right.
All the kids were abused. I mean, I watched him punch Ronald across the room, and so we were all in the middle of all that. But so I said, "Okay, God, I'm gonna do what you tell me to do." And so I wrote a letter. Well, let me go back about a month after I started this process of getting through the forgiveness. I was at work one day. This is back when I was still a machinist, and got a phone call at the office at my place of business where I was working. I worked for Hacker Industries, and they came down and said, "Rod, there's a sheriff on the road on here from Hancock County, Mississippi." I was like, well, I figured Dad died. Somebody died. Bruce or Evelyn died or something happened. So it was Linda, the youngest daughter, and she's like, "Well, we wondered what happened to you, and we found you." And she wound up giving the officer my Social Security number, and he wound up looking for him and finding me. And I'm like, "Wait a minute, dude. You need to understand that's illegal. You can't do that. I mean, that's my Social Security number." But anyway, in the end, they had found me, and she gave me all their contact information. So I never had any of that before this. And so it was kind of like, okay,
God
so
was
God
setting the
kind of,
stage.
he's kind of setting the stage. And so I did that. I wrote the letter, and then I told Bruce, I said, well, I'm coming to visit, and I want to sit and talk to you about all this when I get there. And I kind of gave him a little synopsis of why I was coming. And so I got there, and he was a shell of the man he used to be. He had had a stroke and a heart attack, and he had lost like 100 pounds. He's just really thin and frail looking. And I was like, wow, this ain't the guy I remember. But the verbal abuse was still there. I mean, what he did to us, he was doing to the grandkids. And it was just awful to watch. But anyway, so everybody, of course, was at the house that night when I got there because nobody had seen me for 15 years. And so it was kind of like a little family reunion, but it wasn't. But later that evening, I sat down with him and we were talking, and I just said, well, did you get a chance to read the letter? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what are your thoughts on it? And he looked at me, he says, well, considering how I grew up, I don't think I have anything to be forgiven of. Which I was like, wow.
Yeah,
just sticking a knife in and twisting it, And I was sitting there going, I said, well, you know what? God doesn't say that you have to accept it. He says, I have to give it. And I was like, you're forgiven as far as I'm concerned. Whether that brings you peace or not, it clears my heart, and it clears my conscience, and it clears my soul. And so, we had another conversation the next day, and I had to go back home because I had to go back to work. And so I drove back home, just pretty much befuddled. Sherry didn't go with me. He died a year to the day after that.
Wow.
He was 62 years old, to the day. And I was like, that's just creepy. He died in his garden of a heart attack, working in his garden. And so we went back for his funeral. I had transgressed I had a cousin, Christopher, who was younger than me, that I was very mean to as a kid. Because, I was the youngest, so I always got beat up. So I beat him up, and so I went to him and asked for his forgiveness, and he was kind of shocked. But he said, yeah, okay, and so I was like, good. So I moved on. And then after that, I had peace. The bitterness went away. The anger went away. I was able to move on with my life, And
what's interesting is that there wasn't reconciliation with Bruce.
No.
There was with Chris, it sounds like. There's like a little bit of that connection, but our job is just to forgive or ask forgiveness regardless of how that person reacts to it, right? And
the thing that unforgiveness does is it holds you captive. Doesn't hold them captive. You're not hurting them. You're not hurting them a bit. They don't care if they don't. It's like Bruce. He didn't want to admit it. Didn't want to take responsibility, and so it didn't hurt him at all. He didn't care.
He did, though.
It did, but
it made me think about the story in Daniel, right? Because we're getting ready for Daniel in the fall, and I've been ready. But Nebuchadnezzar got warned, and exactly a year later, he fell into the same pride and was humiliated before him, right? And it's like God was calling to Bruce, like, hey, you need to take some responsibility for the things that happen, and that, we all have baggage and stuff. That doesn't mean that I'm just going to, hey, son, here's all my baggage. I don't have to. Like, I want to break that cycle, like we were talking about earlier, of sin. Yeah. And he was willing to do that.
Yeah, he's unwilling to do it. And unfortunately, his children never did it. Now, the funny thing is that I think some of the girls got saved later in life because, I know from talking with them and so even though they still smoked and did, some of the stuff they did when they're younger, they, I know that from talking to Barbara several times, she really started going to church and getting her life straightened out. And so did Linda. And Linda died probably a year. She died of cancer. Basically, all the girls pretty much ate up with cancer. Just ran in the family. Evelyn, getting back to Evelyn, you notice she just disappears because I don't have any memories of her. Good memories. I mean, I don't have any kind things to say about her because I don't remember anything kind about her.
Yeah.
Bruce would have, when he was sober, he was a fairly nice, decent guy. He would hug you and tell you he loved you. And, every now and then he'd tell you he was proud of you, stuff like that. But, that was very, very seldom,
Mhm.
and very, very seldom that he was a drunk. And, so, but with her, I have no kind or, you know, and I know for a guy that maybe this shouldn't be a big deal, it is a big deal because it reflects over in how you treat your spouse and how you treat your
Yeah.
girls and, all of that kind of stuff. And so, you tend to see women from the eyes of the person who raised you sometimes, and so,
But I can say this,
yeah,
I've seen you be an incredible dad to your
appreciate it.
daughter, so
But
it's been awesome to watch you love on her.
yeah, and so that's been hard, it's like I told you, remember the first time, I mean, when I met Sherry, I was shocked. I mean, like, birthday party? Really? Anniversaries? You celebrated life.
Mhm.
You didn't ignore it, and it was just crazy for me,
Yeah.
her mother, I mean, it was funny. Her aunts would send me birthday cards before she sent her own nieces and nephews. Okay, Aunt Joe Beth used to send me a card every year for my birthday. Never sent one to Sherry. And so I think her and, I think Aunt Joe Beth and Sherry's mother, which I just called her mom, just, saw that I needed a mother and took over that role.
And praise the
And
Lord.
they were very good to me. And, and I just treasure that. And,
Yeah.
but anyway, so, we kept moving through life and, forgiveness and, God blessed us in many, many ways, always had a good job, always provided for us. But when I was 33, we decided we were going to have a baby. We had decided early on that Sherry would not go back to work, that she'd be a stay-at-home mom, and which was really tough for us, but because I was a machinist, I was making 30 grand a year.
Yeah.
It's not like making a lot of money. So, of course, we did live in East Texas, and it was pretty cheap where we lived, and we could probably make it, but God had other plans,
Mhm.
and so we we decided Sherry wouldn't go back to work, and then Victoria was born, and Sherry was actually our youth secretary at church. And so she used to come in there, I get so mad at these youth. I could tell them to stop doing stuff, but they won't do it. But you walk in the room and they just start right up. It's like, but but anyway, Victoria was born and joy of our life. She's just been a blessing to us from day one. Best baby ever. Never cried. Never was a problem. Was just very good kid. Not to say she hadn't had some rough patches as she's grown up, but for the most part, Victoria was just a great kid.
Mhm.
But I decided to change careers in the middle of this, and so I went from being a machinist to being an insurance guy. And the first 3 years, we lost everything we had. We lost our home, we lost our cars, we moved to another city. I mean, we lost everything. I mean, everything I'd worked 15 years to buy and build was gone. Both cars were total in accidents. The
Mhm.
house was we wound up having to almost foreclosed on the house, but wound up, fortunately, the people that were renting it from us when we moved bought it. We were living in a rundown old house out in the middle of nowhere, Decatur, Texas. The first year we lived there, if it weren't for deer hunting, we would have starved to death. Sherry would go pick up pecans in the pecan orchard behind us so I could buy gas and go to work. And so I was working for Farm Bureau and had a good boss, and the job was nice, but it just didn't pay much. It was building, with insurance, it takes a while to
Takes a
build a
while to
book of
build it.
business. And I had a Sunday school teacher named John Caker. Like I said, God has always put good men in my life. And John Caker was incredible guy, very generous, and
Mm.
has pretty much my gifting. Loved to help people, very generous at what he had, and so he gave me a part-time job helping him remodel a office. Well, he was an insurance guy too for Germania.
Yeah.
And so we used to joke around about, yeah, the news ever came out, no, here's the Farm Bureau guy helping the Germania guy, work on his building. And, we would joke around about that. And sometimes we would, he was planning on hiring a guy to work for him, and that fell through. And so he said, well, Rod, would you like to come to work with me? He said, I guarantee you're going to make more money. And I said, sure. And so he probably paid me more than he had to
Yeah.
help me.
Be generous, yeah.
Yeah. And so I worked for John for a year. And during that year, we had a very good church, pretty much like the church here.
Mhm.
We had been exposed to kind of a cell church situation up in Decatur. Had a great little young pastor, good friends, a woman there, Paula Beth Rutherford, discipled Sherry, and her and Sherry were very good friends. Almost lost Sherry and Victoria there. They both got hit by a semi-truck when Victoria's 9 months old. Car was completely crushed, turned upside down. Truck ran over the top of the car. I mean, if you ever saw the car, you go, matter of fact, the highway patrolman said when he walked out of his car, he grabbed his paint can because he knew he was going to be painting bodies on the road. And neither one of them got a scratch.
Yeah, God.
I mean, the car buckled right where both of them were sitting. And the only reason why Sherry got a cut was because she had to crawl back up in the car and try to get Victoria out. Couldn't. Little skinny girl had to crawl up in there and unbuckle her from her car seat to get her out. But I hyperventilate. They had to take me to the hospital when I saw the car.
Yeah.
But went to work for John. I was their number one life sales agency for Germania that year. Got invited to a life conference in Kerrville, Texas at the RO Ranch. And about that time, Germania was transitioning from a mom and pop insurance company to standard storefront agents company. And so they were they had a lot of the old timers selling their agencies. And so I was approached by one of the, board members of the company that, hey, would you be interested in an agency if it came up for sale? And I looked at him, I said, well, I'll be interested, but I ain't got no money to buy nothing. Yeah. I said, man, I can barely pay rent. And he goes, no, we'll help you with that. Are you interested? I was like, sure. And so it wasn't a week later when I was back home that I get this call. And the guy goes, hey, we have this agency for sale. It's in Austin, Texas. Are you interested in buying the agency? And I told him, I said, well, I don't know. Can I drive down and see it and talk to people? They said, sure. So I drove down here. I met with John Halford, incredible Christian, loving people. I talked to him. I looked at it, man, I was like, golly, I don't know. And so I went back home and Sherry and I talked about it. And I was like, man, I just don't know if our marriage can stand another move in poverty, and I went back and I sat down and talked with John. And I said, well, John, what do you think? And he said, well, let's look at the numbers. And so we pulled up all the information on the agency, how many members it had, all that kind of stuff. It was bigger than his agency. And he just looked at me and says, Rod, you'd be a fool not to take this.
Yeah.
He said, you'd be crazy. So I called Mike Kroll up, who was the guy who was running that department at the company at the time. And I said, well, Mike, I said, here's the deal, Mike. I said, I want to do it, but I ain't got no money to move. I said, I'll be honest with you, we're broke. I don't have any money. I don't know how I'm going to rent a house. I don't know either. He says, well, what if we give you a loan to get you there where you take the agency? And I was like, sure. So they gave me a loan. We wound up moving. We moved right over here at Dove Hollow.
Yep.
On Dove Hollow Road Street, and little 12. We looked back then in 2000. Austin was booming. Find a rent house was hard.
Yeah.
And so we walked in and looked at the house while the other people were still renting it. And I told them, yeah, we want it. We put a deposit on the house. We moved here. And then God just blessed us. I mean, I went from 30 grand a year to 70 grand a year, and just like that, which was crazy. We were like, wow.
Yeah. Like, what is this?
What do we do? I got money. I can pay the rent. And so, but some lessons learned through that. Sherry and I learned that we were in it for the long haul. No matter how hard things got, we were both in it together. We were both willing to do what it took to get through it. Our commitment to God, we had made a commitment that Sherry would stay home. She never went, I never said she went back to work. She never did.
Yeah.
We made that commitment. We managed to tithe somehow. Don't know how we did it. We stayed faithful. I always tell people we stayed faithful. God stayed faithful to us.
Mm-hmm.
We learned an immense amount of encouragement with God. We learned how to walk closer with God through all that. Sometimes, like they say, it's the hard times where you learn who your friends are and what you really believe. And so, it was tough, but we got through it and we learned a lot. We learned a lot about each other. I'm glad Victoria wasn't old enough to remember some of that.
I know. That's what Romans 5 says, right?
Yeah.
Like suffering produces endurance, and then that creates character, and character creates hope. Like that suffering made you who you are today, and it made you the parents that you are. And it's amazing how God, when He is there and He's for you, right? What can be against you?
Yeah.